Hey, why don't you marry me instead? I'm a much better fit for you than boring Emily, my sister said as she wrapped her arm around my husband's shoulder and leaned in close to him. Seeing this, all the self-control I had managed to hold onto until now just crumbled. I felt like something inside me snapped. Stop messing around, you've always been like this. I yelled as I lunged at my sister. At that moment, she lost her balance and fell down clumsily. She lay there in an awkward position, her eyes wide open in shock. For a brief moment, everything went silent. This is the story of how things ended between my terrible sister and me. My name is Emily and I'm 27 years old. After graduating from the literature department of a state university, I've been working as a librarian in a public library. One day during my lunch break, I checked my phone and saw a message from my sister, Michelle, who is a year older than me. I'm going to use your blue sandals. They still look new, so that's fine, right? I sighed. My sister has always been like this, ever since we were kids. Whenever I had something, she thought it was better than what she had, so she'd take it, get bored with it, and then give it back to me. My sister is beautiful, even from a family member's perspective. I remember when we were kids, adults would fawn over her and compare her to a French doll. She got into a famous private university through a recommendation and even won a beauty pageant there. Now, my sister is using her beauty to work as a receptionist at a well-known company, living a life that seems like a fairy tale. In contrast, I'm very plain. I have a typical American face, and people often tell me, Emily, you look like a traditional doll. Maybe it's because my sister always picked on me, but I've grown up to be shy and introverted. While my sister played with dolls, I was the kind of kid who sat alone and quietly read books. But I'm okay with that. I always wanted to live a life surrounded by books, so I studied hard with that goal in mind. Now, I'm living my dream as a librarian, processing checkouts, helping people find books, and enjoying the quiet life I've always wanted. Whenever I'm working at the library, I remember something from my high school days. I went to the same school as my sister, and I was always tired of hearing things like, "Oh, so this is Michelle's sister." My only joy back then was writing book reviews for the library committee. Most students were busy with clubs and dating, so they didn't care much about my reviews, but I kept writing them anyway, hoping someone would appreciate the books I loved. There was one person who did. A male student, a year ahead of me, would read every book I reviewed. It made me feel validated, and that made me happy. We never really talked except when he borrowed a book, but I always remembered his name from his library card. I often wonder how he was doing now, if he still loved reading. Sometimes I think about him, the person who encouraged my love for books without even knowing it. Then one day, my sister got a marriage proposal. She was 28, so it wasn't surprising that these talks were starting. A blind date with this guy, Michelle said dramatically as she threw the photos and the man's profile onto the table. A loud noise startled me as I was eating. "So, what kind of person is he?" my mother asked. "He's just this chubby, nerdy-looking guy, and he's only a temp worker. Why do I have to go on a blind date with someone like that?" Michelle complained. "Well, if you don't like him, just turn him down," I said. "But he's connected to some executive at our client's company. I can't just reject him outright. It's so frustrating," Michelle said, looking troubled. Then suddenly her face lit up. "Oh, I know. Emily, you should go on the blind date." I was shocked by her suggestion. Seeing my wide-eyed surprise, Michelle quickly explained, "You're a bit of a nerd yourself, right? You might actually get along with him. He's not my type at all, but he could be perfect for you since, well, you're not exactly a beauty queen. So could you take my place this weekend?" "What are you talking about? I don't want to do it either. It would be rude to the guy, and how would we even explain me going instead of you?" "It'll be fine as long as you go. Just don't ruin my reputation," Michelle said, shoving the blind date photo and profile in my direction. When I looked at them, I let out a surprised sound. "What? Is there a problem?" "No, no problem at all. Thanks, Michelle. I'll accept this match." "Huh? You actually like that chubby nerd? Well, he's all yours. Can't wait to see the birth of the nerdy couple," Michelle teased. Ignoring her mocking tone, I kept staring at the blind date photo and profile. Then on the day of the blind date, I first apologized to the man for Michelle's rudeness, and then told him I was interested in getting to know him instead. The man sitting across from me was indeed chubby and had a bit of a nerdy vibe, but he still looked familiar. Yes, the man on this blind date was the same person who used to borrow books after reading my reviews in high school. He looked at me directly and hesitated a little before asking, "Were you by any chance the librarian at our high school?" "Yes, I was," I replied, remembering him as well. From there, we hit it off, talking about our high school days and our love of books. That's how my relationship with Thomas began. He was in the same grade as my sister, Michelle, but she didn't remember him at all. During one of our dates, Thomas said to me, "Honestly, Emily, if Michelle had shown up, I would have turned her down. Her personality is quite notorious after all, but knowing who I am, she probably would have rejected me first." I'm really sorry about what happened with my sister back then, but I was so happy to see you again, Thomas. Plus, I think you're wonderful. If you're worried about your appearance, why don't we try to lose some weight together? You're right, I've been so focused on work that I stopped exercising and caring about how I look. I'll try harder so that you won't dislike me, Thomas responded. I'm glad to hear that, but you know I would never dislike you just because of your appearance, I assured him. We had conversations like this, and our dates went smoothly. Eventually, Thomas proposed, and we decided to get married. My sister, who said, "I've seen that fat guy's face before," didn't attend our wedding, but when our families met, everyone wished us well in a warm atmosphere. Afterward, we found a new home and started our life together. Then, on the day of our wedding, my sister remarked, "Having a church wedding in this day and age is so typical of plain old Emily. That dress suits you, just like a traditional American doll." I felt miserable being insulted by my sister, even in my wedding dress. Soon, Thomas and his family arrived. "Good morning, we're looking forward to today," he said. When Thomas appeared in his traditional suit, my sister let out a small gasp, and for good reason. Thomas had worked hard to transform his appearance with me, and he had become strikingly handsome. Before the ceremony began, my sister whispered in my ear, "What the heck? He looks nothing like the photo from before." "Thomas worked hard," I replied. "He always had a beautiful face. He just looked dull in that photo because he was overweight and had a bad haircut." "I thought he had plastic surgery. It's great that a porcelain doll like you could marry a man who looks like a movie star," she snarked. Despite enduring my sister's sarcasm, we managed to get through the wedding ceremony. We had a small reception at the church with only the people who mattered to us. Just as we were about to leave, feeling happy and blessed, it happened. "Hello there, Thomas. Thanks for marrying my ugly little sister," my drunk sister approached us and said. "Emily isn't ugly at all. Thank you for today. Shouldn't you head home, sister?" Thomas said, trying to defuse the situation. But my sister ignored him and continued, "So, Thomas, you've changed your appearance, but what about your job? I heard you were working as a temp, right?" my sister continued. "Yes, I am currently working as a temp," Thomas replied calmly. "Oh, I can never stand having a husband who's just a temp. I'm currently dating a startup CEO, and I might get married soon," she bragged. "Congratulations," Thomas said politely, cutting off any further remarks I might have had. He gently restrained me with his hand and gave a small shake of his head. "Thank you for coming today, sister. Please be careful on your way home." My sister, who had been silenced by Thomas, left after saying, "Be very happy, Thomas." "I'm really sorry about my sister," I said once she was gone. "It's all right, people like her won't change no matter what you say. But Emily, you've had a tough time. Let's strive for happiness from now on," Thomas reassured me. "Thomas, thank you," I responded, feeling a deep sense of relief and gratitude. And so, my married life with Thomas began. In fact, Thomas was working as a temp while trying to make it as a novelist. He had fallen in love with reading after coming across some book reviews I had written in high school, which had inspired him to start writing himself. He had only had a few pieces published in literary magazines so far, but I knew that was still an impressive achievement. He was getting paid for his manuscripts, but there was still some financial uncertainty, which is why he was balancing his temp job with his writing. "Thomas, I have a job too, and we have some savings. Why don't you focus solely on your writing?" I suggested one evening. "Emily, you're always so supportive." "Thank you. I'll do my best," Thomas agreed, and he quit his job to dedicate himself fully to writing. Life wasn't easy, but I loved watching Thomas passionately dive into his manuscripts, and that kept us going. Then, one day, we got a call from my sister Michelle. She was engaged to the startup CEO she had mentioned. "So, next week he's coming over to meet the family before we get married. You should come too. I really don't want to introduce him to you and your jobless husband, but it would be odd if he weren't there. Make sure you dress appropriately," she said with her usual condescension. Despite my annoyance at Michelle's attitude, I knew we had to attend her engagement and wedding. With that in mind, Thomas and I decided to attend the family meeting. "I'm sorry you have to miss your important event that day, Thomas," I said, feeling a bit guilty. "It's okay, Emily. She's your sister after all," Thomas said, trying to reassure me as we arrived at the meeting place. Michelle, wearing a smug expression, greeted us with her usual condescension. "Welcome, the antisocial couple. Be nice to my darling, will you?" Ignoring her jibes, we entered the restaurant and exchanged greetings with Michelle's fiancé. He was a flashy, handsome man, a stark contrast to Thomas, but he looked capable in his profession. "I'm Emily, Michelle's sister. It's nice to meet you," I said, doing my best to be polite. "And I'm Thomas, Emily's husband. Nice to meet you," Thomas added. As we exchanged greetings, Michelle's fiancé, Larry, also bowed his head and said, "Nice to meet you too." I tried my best to ignore my sister, who was beaming victoriously next to him. Just then, Thomas's phone rang. "I'm sorry, this is important. I need to step outside for a moment," Thomas said, excusing himself from the table. As Thomas left the room, I felt nervous despite being at dinner with our parents, Michelle, and her fiancé. My mind was elsewhere, worrying about what might be so urgent. Then, a flustered Thomas returned to the room and whispered something in my ear. "Really? Congratulations, Thomas. That's amazing." I couldn't help but raise my voice, filled with excitement. "What's the matter?" "Not at a time like this," my mother asked, a surprised look on her face. "Thomas's novel won a major literary award, and it's going to be made into a movie," I exclaimed, unable to contain my happiness. "Is that true? Well done, Thomas." My mother's face lit up with joy. "Yes, that's great, Thomas. It was worth it. All that support Emily has given you," my father added, beaming with pride. Our parents were overjoyed, and even Larry applauded, offering his congratulations. "Congratulations, Thomas. I'm delighted to hear such wonderful news. Let's drink to celebrate." "I'm sorry, but I need to give some interviews about the award," Thomas said, clearly thrilled but also overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "All right, I guess that's about it for Thomas and Emily," my mom said, ready to conclude the evening on a high note. But just as she was about to say this, something unthinkable happened. Michelle, who had been sitting next to Larry, suddenly stood up and walked over to us, positioning herself between Thomas and me. "Hey sis, what the—" "Shut up, ugly." Michelle's voice was icy and full of malice. "Hey, Thomas, why don't we get married? I mean, I'm far more suited for a successful award-winning author like you than someone like Emily, right?" As she said this, she placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder and drew herself close to him. I felt like my world was crumbling down around me. Michelle had always wanted what I had, and once she was tired of it, she'd shove it aside. She constantly looked down on Thomas and me, belittling us. Yet, because we were family, because she was my sister, I had tolerated her. But no more. I felt the tension inside me snap. "That's enough, Michelle," I shouted, my voice trembling with anger and frustration. "You've always been like this." I yelled and lunged at Michelle, but she lost her balance and fell awkwardly onto the floor. Thomas, who had been leaning toward Michelle, quickly stepped back. Michelle, now sitting clumsily on the carpet, looked up at us with wide, surprised eyes. I froze, unsure of what to do next. What are you doing?" Michelle stammered. "That's what I should be asking you. What were you thinking?" Thomas's voice was cold and firm as he looked down at her, clearly disgusted. I was offering to marry you," Michelle stuttered. "Even if I were the last man on earth, I'd say no. Emily is the only one for me, for life," Thomas replied sharply. Michelle, frustrated, shouted, "What's so good about Emily? I'm prettier, I have a better figure. Emily is not only beautiful on the outside, but also on the inside. She's been by my side through everything, and that's why I've succeeded." "Something you could never do," Thomas said, coming over to me and putting his arm around my shoulders. His words made my anger towards Michelle melt away, and warm tears began to stream down my face. "What the hell? Even after all my efforts to get your attention, you rejected me." Michelle's face turned bright red, her voice shaking with anger and humiliation. "Michelle, what are you doing? Do you even realize what kind of event this is? Isn't Larry supposed to be your fiancé?" Our parents scolded her, finally snapping out of their shock. Looking as if she had just woken up from a bad dream, Michelle ran over to Larry. "I'm sorry, Larry, I guess it has to be you after all." "Enough, just stop," Larry said, straightening his tie. "Who would want to marry a woman who throws herself at another married man during a family meeting? Let's call off this engagement, shall we? I'm sure you understand why." Our parents turned pale and could only nod in agreement, clearly embarrassed by the situation. "Wait a minute, even you, Larry? I've already told everyone we're getting married. It'll be a disaster if you don't marry me," my sister shouted in desperation. Larry, still calm, responded, "It's over, Michelle." I decided it was time to leave. I wished Thomas congratulations once more and gave him my best wishes. Larry walked out of the room and we could only bow our heads in silence. Wait a minute, Larry." My sister's frantic cries echoed as she desperately tried to stop him. But Larry didn't turn back. I felt disgusted and told my sister, "Don't show your face around here for a while." Our parents also left the restaurant, casting a disapproving glance at her. "Let's go home," I said, gripping Thomas's hand tightly. As we turned to leave, I saw my sister collapse, looking dazed and defeated. A few months later, after her engagement with Larry ended, my sister seemed down for a while but soon started searching for a new partner. She was only interested in high-profile men and those who were impressed by her ambitious attitude. Unfortunately, as my sister's beauty faded with age, it became harder for her to find a partner. Meanwhile, Thomas, who had been busy with award ceremonies, interviews, and film releases after winning his award, is now focused on his next project. He has always been kind to me and is now known as a loving husband. He often shares stories about me in his interviews, and he supports me as my pregnancy progresses. I'm committed to always supporting Thomas,